I left the city on a morning that looked no different from any other morning I had lived through there. The sky was pale, neither bright nor heavy with rain. The streets were already awake. Motorbikes flowed past each other with the same impatience I had grown used to, and small coffee shops opened their doors as if following a script they had memorized years ago. Everything moved with purpose, with certainty. Except me. I stood at the bus station with a single suitcase and a strange feeling that I was arriving somewhere instead of leaving. People walked past me quickly, eyes fixed on their phones or the road ahead. No one noticed me standing still. In a city this large, being unnoticed was easy. For a long time, I believed this city was where my life would finally begin. I came here when I was young enough to confuse endurance with ambition. Back then, every street felt like a promise. Every late night felt meaningful. I told myself that if I stayed long enough, if I worked hard enough, everything I wanted would eventually fall into place. I stayed. Years passed quietly. Primero found work, then better work, then work that demanded more of me than I was willing to admit. My days became predictable. My goals became practical. I learned how to survive comfortably, which is very different from learning how to live. The bus had not arrived yet. I checked the departure board even though I already knew the schedule. Old habits die slowly. I reached for my phone, scrolled through messages that led nowhere, and locked the screen again. There was no one I needed to inform that I was leaving. That realization stayed with me longer than it should have. The city had given me a routine, a salary, a sense of direction that looked respectable from the outside. What it had quietly taken away was harder to name. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself difficult questions. I stopped imagining a future that felt personal. I learned how to delay decisions until they no longer felt urgent. Later became my favorite answer. Later, when things are more stable. Later, when I feel ready. Later, when life slows down. But life never slowed down. The bus finally arrived, with a low mechanical sigh. People lined up without speaking. I followed them, stepping inside and choosing a seat near the window. As I placed my suitcase beside me, a tension settled in my chest, not fear, not excitement, but awareness. The kind that appears when something familiar is about to end. The engine started. Through the window, the city began to move. Buildings passed by slowly at first, narrow alleys I had walked through countless times. Street corners where I had waited for conversations that never happened. Cafes where I had spent hours convincing myself that comfort was enough. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass and watched everything slide away. I remembered the early years when exhaustion felt rewarding, when being busy made me feel important, when I believed that patience alone could replace courage. I told myself that staying was the responsible choice, that leaving would mean admitting failure. What I did not realize was that staying had its own cost. It cost me honesty. It cost me clarity. It cost me time. The bus stopped at a red light. For a brief moment, everything was still. Pedestrians crossed the street. A street vendor adjusted his cart. Someone laughed nearby, unaware of how loud it sounded to someone listening too closely. I wondered how many people around me were also waiting for a moment that never came. The light turned green. The bus moved again. As the city slowly faded, something inside me loosened. I had not felt this kind of quiet in years. Not the quiet of loneliness, but the quiet of space to think without immediately pushing the thoughts away. I did not have a clear plan. I was not chasing a dream I could easily explain. I only knew that staying had begun to feel more frightening than leaving. Outside the window, buildings grew shorter. Traffic thinned. The road stretched forward, wide and honest. There was something comforting about its simplicity. It did not promise answers. It only offered movement. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to admit the truth. I had been living as if life were endless, as if there would always be another chance to speak honestly, another chance to choose differently, another chance to start over when the timing felt perfect. But life does not work that way. It gives you moments. Quiet, ordinary moments that ask for courage without announcing themselves. If you miss them, they do not return in the same form. As the bus carried me farther away from the city, I felt the weight of that understanding settle in. This was not a dramatic escape. It was a decision made after too many delays. A decision shaped by the quiet realization that there may only be one chance to live a life that feels true. And I'd already waited long enough. The place I thought I had forgotten, the bus left the highway as the sun climbed higher, turning the sky into a washed shade of blue. Fields replaced buildings. Noise softened into distance. I felt my shoulders relax in a way I had not noticed myself needing. I was going back to the place I had spent years trying not to think about. It was not a dramatic hometown filled with unresolved conflicts or grand memories. It was a small town on the edge of familiarity, quiet enough to be forgotten by most people, including me. I had left it without anger, without ceremony. I simply believed there was nothing there for me anymore. Cities have a way of convincing you that the past is irrelevant. As the bus moved deeper into the countryside, fragments of memory surfaced without warning. The narrow road that curved toward the river. The old sign near the entrance of town, its paint faded by years of sun and rain. I had passed it countless times before, always assuming I would return someday with better news about who I had become. The bus slowed. A few passengers stood, gathering their belongings. When my stop was announced, my heart reacted before my mind did. I stepped down onto the pavement and watched the bus disappear into the distance, carrying strangers and urgency away with it. The air smelled different here. Not better, not worse, just honest. I stood still for a moment, listening. There were no horns, no overlapping conversations, no sense that time was pressing forward without me. The town existed at its own pace, indifferent to my expectations. I began to walk. The streets were familiar but altered, like a face you recognize after years apart. Some buildings were gone. Others stood exactly where I remembered them, unchanged, as if waiting. I passed a small grocery store where I used to buy snacks after school. The sign was newer now, but the door creaked the same way when someone went in or out. A memory surfaced of a younger version of myself standing there, convinced that leaving this place would solve everything. Back then, I thought distance was the answer. I walked without a destination, letting my feet decide where to go. The road led me toward the river, just as it always had. The water moved slowly, reflecting the sky in uneven patterns. I leaned against the railing of the small bridge and watched it pass beneath me. Nothing here demanded that I be anyone specific. That realization unsettled me. In the city, I had learned to define myself by function, by productivity, by how useful I appeared to be. Here, none of that mattered. The river did not care what I had achieved. The wind did not ask how long I had stayed away. For a moment I felt exposed. Then I felt relief. I found a small guest house not far from the river. The owner recognized my face before my name, which surprised both of us. She spoke casually, as if I had never left, handed me a key, and pointed me toward a room on the second floor. No questions. No explanations required. The room was simple, clean, quiet. I placed my suitcase by the bed and sat down, unsure what to do next. There was no schedule waiting for me, no emails demanding immediate attention. The silence felt unfamiliar, almost too open. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. This was the part no one talks about when they say you should follow your heart. The moment after the decision, when nothing happens. When there is no clear sign that you chose correctly. When doubt has enough space to speak. Had I made a mistake? I thought about the life I had left behind. The stability, the predictability, the comfort of knowing exactly what tomorrow would require from me. I could still return. The option existed, quiet but present. The thought did not comfort me the way it once would have. I sat up and opened the window. The sound of the river drifted in, steady and unhurried. Somewhere outside, someone laughed. Somewhere else, a door closed gently. Life was happening without performance. I realized then that I had not come back to this place to reclaim the past. I had come back to remove the end, to remember who I was before my choices became automatic. Before fear learned how to disguise itself as responsibility. Before I convinced myself that postponing life was the same as protecting it. That night, I walked through the town as the sky darkened. Lights turned on, one by one, soft and unassuming. I felt like a visitor in a place that had never truly stopped belonging to me. As I returned to the guest house, a quiet understanding settled in. Leaving the city was only the first step. The harder part would be deciding what to do now that I could finally hear myself think. When silence starts asking questions, morning arrived quietly. Light filtered through the thin curtains, settling gently on the floor. I lay awake longer than necessary, listening to the unfamiliar absence of urgency. There was no alarm, no immediate reason to move. The day waited for me without pressure. That alone felt strange. I stepped outside after breakfast and walked toward the river again. The town moved slowly at this hour. A few shop owners swept their doorways. An elderly man rode past on a bicycle, nodding politely as if we had known each other for years. Here, presence seemed enough. As I walked, my thoughts wandered without direction, and for the first time in a long while, I did not rush to control them. Images from the city drifted in and out of focus, meetings that blurred together, evenings spent staring at screens, conversations that stayed on the surface because it was easier that way. I had called that life busy. Standing by the river, I began to recognize it for what it really was. Avoidance. The water moved forward without hesitation. It did not pause to consider whether it deserved to reach the next bend. Watching it, I felt an uncomfortable question rise within me. When had I stopped moving forward? I returned to the guest house and found a notebook in my bag, untouched for years. I had brought it with me without thinking, a habit from a time when writing felt necessary. I sat at the small desk and opened it, staring at the blank page as if it might accuse me. Nothing came at first. Then a single sentence formed, hesitant but honest. I don't know what I want anymore. Seeing it written down felt heavier than thinking it. I kept writing, slowly at first, then with growing ease. I wrote about the city, about the years that disappeared into routines, about the fear of choosing wrong and the comfort of choosing nothing. Words filled the pages unevenly, without structure, but they carried something I had ignored for too long. Regret. Not sharp, dramatic regret, but the quiet kind that settles in slowly, the kind that comes from realizing how many moments had passed without my full attention. In the afternoon, I wandered deeper into town. I passed my old school, its gates slightly rusted, the walls marked by time. I stood there longer than necessary, watching students leave, their conversations loud and unfiltered. They believed time belonged to them. I remembered feeling the same way, back when decisions felt temporary and mistakes felt reversible. I wondered what I would tell my younger self, if given the chance. The answer came quickly, and it surprised me with its simplicity. Don't wait. Not for certainty, not for permission, not for the perfect moment. I continued walking until I reached a small cafe I had not noticed before. I went inside and ordered a drink I did not need, just to sit somewhere unfamiliar. The cafe was nearly empty. Soft music played in the background, barely demanding attention. I watched the door. For reasons I did not yet understand, part of me expected someone to walk in, someone from the past. Someone who would explain why leaving it felt necessary back then, and why returning felt unavoidable now. No one came. Instead, a different realization settled in. I had been carrying the weight of unfinished choices, not unfinished relationships. It was easier to blame circumstances, people, timing. Harder to admit that I had been afraid to act when it mattered most. That evening, I received a message from the city. A colleague asking when I would be back. The question was casual, polite, unaware of how much it stirred. I stared at the screen for a long time. I could reply easily, give a date, reassured the man myself that this pause was temporary. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then I put the phone down. The silence that followed felt heavier than any response I could have sent, but it also felt true. As night fell, I walked back to the river. The water reflected scattered lights from the town, fragmented but calm. I stood there, breathing slowly, and accepted something I had avoided for years. Leaving the city had not solved anything. It had only removed the distractions. Now, I had no choice but to face the questions I had postponed. Questions about who I wanted to become, and whether I was willing to risk disappointment for the chance to live honestly. I understood then that life does not announce turning points. It simply offers them, and whether you recognize them or not determines everything that follows. The cost of waiting after that conversation. The town no longer felt like a place of rest. It became a mirror. Every street reflected something I had avoided seeing. Every familiar corner carried the quiet weight of what might have been. I moved through my days carefully, as if the wrong step might collapse something fragile inside me. I began to understand that returning was not a gift. It was a reckoning. I saw her again a few days later, not by accident this time. We met for coffee, an unspoken agreement guiding us to sit across from each other and speak honestly. Even if honesty arrived slowly, there was comfort between us, but it no longer promised safety. It demanded clarity. She spoke about her life now, about responsibilities she carried without resentment, about choices she stood by, even when they had been difficult. I listened, realizing how much strength grows from commitment, Tenny. Commitment made without hesitation. I wondered who I might have become if I had chosen sooner. When she asked about my plans, I did not answer immediately. The truth felt unfinished. I don't know yet, I said. She nodded, accepting the answer without encouragement or disappointment. That, too, felt intentional. After we parted, I walked alone for hours. The river moved steadily beside me, unchanged by my thoughts. I realized then that time does not slow down for clarity. It continues forward, collecting consequences along the way. That night, I received another message from the city. This time, it was not casual. There were changes coming, responsibilities shifting, decisions needing confirmation. I was asked to commit to return, to continue, to resume a life. I'd paused but not released. The message did not threaten. It simply assumed. I stared at the screen long after it dimmed. For years, I had lived as if doors remained open indefinitely, as if choosing later preserved all options. Now, I saw the flaw in that belief. Every delay was a choice that narrowed the future, even when it felt like it didn't. I slept poorly. In the early hours of morning, I woke with a heaviness I could not ignore. The weight was not fear, it was grief. Grief for the version of myself who believed time was patient. Grief for moments that had passed quietly, unnoticed until they were gone. I returned to the river at dawn. The water reflected the pale sky, offering no answers. I understood then that clarity does not arrive as certainty. It arrives as responsibility. You decide, and then you carry the outcome. As the days passed, the town continued its gentle rhythm. Life here did not pause for my internal conflict. That steadiness became its own lesson. While I had been waiting for meaning to reveal itself, others had been living imperfectly, bravely, fully. I saw it in small ways, in the shop owner opening early despite the cold, in neighbors helping each other without announcement, in her moving forward without bitterness, despite the past we shared. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One evening, she and I walked together again. This time, without expectation, the conversation flowed icily until it reached the inevitable pause. "You know," she said, "I used to think that timing was something you waited for." She stopped walking and looked at me. "Now I think it's something you choose." The words stayed with me long after we parted. That night, I sat alone in my room, the city's message still unanswered. I realized that no matter what I chose next, something would be lost. Returning would mean accepting that this place and what it represented could never be reclaimed. Staying would mean stepping into uncertainty without guarantees. There was no path without cost. For the first time, I stopped wishing for an easier choice. I only wished I had learned sooner that life rarely gives more than one real chance to decide who you are going to be. The moment that did not wait, the call, came late at night. It was brief, fragmented, and carried a tone that needed no explanation. I understood what it meant before the words settled fully in my mind. Some news arrives not as information, but as certainty. I stood still, phone pressed against my ear, listening to details that blurred together. By the time the call ended, the room felt unfamiliar, as if its shape had changed. Someone important was gone, not suddenly, not violently, just quietly, the way many endings arrive when you believe there will still be time tomorrow. I walked outside without thinking. The town was asleep. Street lights cast soft circles on empty roads. The river moved as it always had, indifferent to loss. I stood there for a long time, trying to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. I realized that this loss hurt not only because of absence, but because of everything that had been postponed. Conversations delayed, visits promised later, care assumed but not demonstrated when it mattered most. I had believed that love could survive neglect as long as intentions remained good. I was wrong. The following days passed in a quiet haze. I attended rituals that felt both familiar and distant. Faces I recognized spoke to me gently, as if volume alone could soften regret. I listened, nodded, responded when expected. Inside, something was closing. I kept thinking about how easily I could have returned earlier. How many times I decided against it, convinced there would always be another chance. The truth was unbearable in its simplicity. There hadn't been time. There had only been hesitation. In the moments between responsibilities, I found myself replaying ordinary memories. Sarit, meals, short conversations, small kindnesses that I had taken for granted. None of them seemed important when they were happening. Now, they were everything. I saw her again after the loss. We didn't talk much. Words felt unnecessary. She understood without explanation. That was the strange comfort of shared history. It recognizes pain even when it has no solution. I used to think regret was loud, I said quietly as we stood near the river. She shook her head. It's quiet. That's why people miss it, until it's too late. The city messaged again. This time, I did not open it immediately. I knew what it would say. Deadlines. Expectations. The assumption that life could continue from where it had paused. But something fundamental had shifted. Loss has a way of rearranging priorities without asking permission. It strips away excuses, leaving only what is essential. I understood then that my fear had never been about choosing wrong. It had been about choosing fully, because once you choose fully, you accept that some paths will close forever. That night, I opened the notebook again. I wrote without stopping, letting the words form without restraint. I wrote about absence, about delayed courage, about how easily life slips past when you are waiting for certainty. I wrote one sentence over and over until it no longer felt abstract. You don't get unlimited chances. The truth of it settled deep. I thought about the person I had lost, about what I would give for one more ordinary conversation. One more shared silence. Not to say anything, dramatic, just to be present without distraction. That opportunity would never return. And suddenly, everything became clear. The pain I felt was not meant to punish me. It was meant to teach me. Life does not ask if you are ready before it takes something away. It does not pause while you gather courage. The only control you have is how you show up before that moment arrives. As dawn approached, I stood by the window and watched the sky change. For the first time since returning, I did not feel torn between places. I felt anchored. There was still a choice ahead of me, but now it carried weight and clarity. Whatever I decided next would not be made from fear or habit. It would be made from understanding that some moments only come once, and missing them changes everything. Choosing with you after the loss, Tim days no longer blurred together. Each morning arrived with weight, as if asking to be acknowledged instead of endured. I noticed small things more clearly, the sound of footsteps on the street. The way light shifted across I understood then that life had I had. And in that, as the city's message waited unread for hours before I finally opened it. As expected, it asked for a confirmation. A decision, a return to what was familiar, structured, predictable. The language was polite, efficient, almost comforting in its certainty. I set the phone down without replying. Not out of rebellion, not out of honesty. For years, I had mistaken familiarity for safety. I had believed that as long as something was known, it could not hurt me. Now I understood how misleading that belief had been. The familiar had cost me more than uncertainty ever had. I walked through the town with intention, not searching for answers, but allowing them to arrive if they chose. I passed places that now felt anchored in meaning. The river, tea, bridge, the cafe where silence had taught me more than I met her again near the river, as if the place itself understood what still needed to be said. We did not speak immediately. Some truths require space before language. You look different, she said eventually. I smiled. Not because I felt lighter, but because I felt aligned. I feel different. She nodded. There was no expectation in her expression, No hope disguised as patience whose presence. We talked about the loss without dramatizing it. About how grief reshapes priorities. About how pain clarifies what comfort never could. She listened, not trying to guide me, not offering reassurance. She had learned, long ago, that each person must arrive at courage alone. I don't know what I'll do next, I admitted. That's okay, she replied. Knowing what you won't do is already something. The simplicity of her response struck me. For so long, I had waited for certainty before moving forward. I had never considered that clarity could begin with refusal. That evening, I returned to my room and packed slowly, not to leave immediately, but to acknowledge that staying still forever was no longer an option. Every object I folded carried a memory of who I had been when I brought it here. None of those versions felt complete anymore. I sat by the window as night settled in, thinking about the person I had lost, about how many chances I had assumed were waiting, about how quietly life proves you wrong. I spoke aloud, though no one was there to hear me. I won't wait anymore. The words did not feel dramatic. They felt necessary. The next morning, I wrote a message not to the city, but to myself. I wrote about choosing presence over potential, commitment over comfort, action over endless preparation. I did not promise success. I did not outline a perfect future. I only promised honesty. When I finally responded to the city, the message was brief. I thanked them. I declined. I did not explain. Some decisions do not need justification. As I pressed send, I expected fear to follow. Instead, I felt something steadier, a calm that did not depend on outcome, a sense that whatever came next would at least belong to me. Standing by the river one last time that day, I watched the water move forward, unburdened by the past it left behind. I realized that this, too, was a kind of courage, not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act despite it. Life does not reward those who wait for certainty. It reveals itself to those who choose, while time is still willing to listen. Living with the choice after the decision was made, nothing dramatic happened. The world did not pause. The town did not change its rhythm. The river continued to move forward, steady and indifferent. Life, it seemed, was uninterested in applauding courage. And yet, everything felt different. Primera, Stajith, not as someone hiding from the future, but as someone finally willing to meet it without armor. Days passed, with a new kind of attention. I noticed how mornings felt when they were not rushed, how conversations deepened when they were not treated as interruptions, how silence could be generous instead of uncomfortable. I began to help where I could, small things at first. Assisting neighbors, taking on simple work that asked for presence rather than ambition. None of it felt impressive, but it felt real. For the first time in years, my days belonged to me. I still thought about the city, about the life I had stepped away from. The thought no longer carried longing or resentment. It carried understanding. That chapter had taught me discipline, resilience, and the cost of confusion. It had served its purpose. Not every ending needs to be rewritten to be meaningful. I saw her often, but our relationship changed shape. There was no attempt to reclaim what time had altered, no effort to force a version of the past into the present. What remained between us was quieter and stronger than expectation. Mutual respect. Some connections are not meant to be restored. They are meant to be honored. One evening, we sat by the river as the sky darkened slowly. No agenda, no unresolved questions. Just shared presence. I used to think that choosing meant losing something, I said. She looked at the water. 10, bake at me. It does. But it also means keeping something else. That stayed with me. In the weeks that followed, I continued writing, not to publish, not to explain myself, but to remember, to document moments before they slipped quietly into memory. Writing became a way of staying awake to my own life. I realized how easily people drift through their days without noticing them. How often we postpone attention, assuming there will always be more time to give it later. There isn't. Life does not announce when a moment is important. It only reveals it afterward. One morning, I walked past the bridge and watched the river catch the light in a way I had never noticed before. The beauty of it was unremarkable and unforgettable. It struck me then that this was what I had been missing all along. Not success, not certainty, but presence. I thought about the person I had lost, about how their absence had reshaped my understanding of time. I no longer wished for one more chance to say something profound. I wished only that I had been fully there when it mattered. That wish became my discipline, to show up while there is still time, to speak honestly before silence settles in, to choose before choice disappears. As seasons shifted, I accepted that life would remain imperfect. Doubt still visited. Fear still whispered, but neither was allowed to decide for me anymore. I had learned, too late for some moments, but early enough for others, that life offers very few real chances. Not infinite opportunities to reinvent yourself. Not endless moments to return and correct what was left undone. Just a handful of quiet crossroads. And what you do when you reach them determines everything that follows. I did not know where this path would lead, but for the first time, I was walking it awake.